You wanted real talk, and this is where you'll hear it. Uninhibited by the toxic influences of cancel culture, unvarnished and unfettered, unencumbered by the censorship of traditional radio, uncontaminated by big media interests.
And now, Sherman Unlimited.
Hi, I'm Peter Sherman, and I'll admit a confused Peter Sherman. I am trying to reconcile the various versions of the trucker story and at the same time come to some reasonable conclusions about the efficacy of a vaccine that was designed for one thing and is now being used against something quite different, aside from it still being called COVID-19. It doesn't take a medical professional now to know that Omicron is not particularly similar to the original enemy, or what they like to call COVID Alpha today. But let's work our way through all of this, starting with the truckers and their objectives. We originally heard that Canadian truckers were angry about mandates forcing them to get vaccinated if they wanted to cross the border into Canada without having to quarantine for 14 days. We also heard that this initiative originated on our side and was matched for those entering the United States. I said on this podcast less than 2 weeks ago that it was my belief most of the truckers were vaccinated already, and that in their collective, the view was that they were speaking for many, many Canadians in standing up to what has clearly become an authoritarian government on the issue of vaccine mandates and restrictions generally. I realize provinces have the ultimate say, but the tone is set in Ottawa. So there have been and are trucker protests all over Canada, and some are ongoing, but the focus is on Ottawa. In the incipient stages of the ride to Ottawa and the formation of the blockade, we heard about and saw some ugly things. Lots of Fuck Trudeau signs, a Confederate flag, the symbol of white supremacy, several flags bearing swastikas, the ultimate Nazi racist symbol. I've seen all of these things before. What I wanted to know was whether any of that spoke in general terms about who these truckers were, or whether they were just the omnipresent bad apples who were there specifically to be photographed and then reported on by lazy big media looking for any negative to affix to the entire demonstration and the idea of it. Here is a bit of what ensued for me. I had a few verbal tug-of-war incidents with friends and family who found themselves at odds. My expressed belief, and I maintain it, was that the majority of these people were simply pissed off Canadians who saw and seized an opportunity to represent a lot of other pissed off Canadians. The message was a lot less about allowing unvaxxed truckers to cross a border and a lot more about stop the constant meddling in our lives and go govern. And by the way, stop yelling insults at people about getting vaxxed if they just don't want to. Full disclosure, I am fully vaxxed and boosted. Now, if you doubt my interpretation, go to the internet and peruse the photos taken at every overpass on the 401 as the truckers made their way to Ottawa. There were more local townspeople out there on every one of those overpasses with Canadian flags than when the bodies of fallen soldiers returned from Afghanistan and were driven to Toronto on the Highway of Heroes. There were ordinary citizens offering homemade meals and hot coffee to passing truckers. Well, they got to Ottawa, began settling in, and gummed up the core of the city where they are parked and entrenched for over a week, and they're there for a long siege. Are they good guys? And should we support them? You might ask that. Or are they bad guys we should urge our governments to remove forcibly? That discussion continues amongst ordinary citizens across this country. Difficult question for many. My own discussions demonstrated that. There were and are a lot of interesting side stories, though. For one, they don't trust mainstream media because they feel Trudeau basically owns all of that by proxy. The radio, television, and newspapers are largely benefiting from funds set up by the Trudeau government to help them stay alive in this world of more and more personal media where guys like me can opine, or individuals like you can write a blog, or anyone with a Twitter account can offer any opinion he or she likes 24/7. The truckers have barred media like CBC and CTV access to their news conferences because they have lost trust in them. How interesting that those monster networks are front and center in Trudeau news conferences, but smaller independents are excluded. Talk about tables turned. So what's happening on the ground? A friend sent me a blog post from a local non-reporter. I don't know him, but it's written by an ordinary working Canadian who lives in the heart of the affected area. The guy doesn't claim to be a reporter. He just went out his front door for a walk along Kent Street in Ottawa because he wanted to see what he could find out about his new and unexpected neighbors. The blog chronicled his all-night encounters with truckers, real truckers, from literally across the entire country. He came away with a positive feeling, having embarked on this mini-adventure quite apprehensively. He was basically nobody as he entered. No camera, no microphone, no reporter's notebook, no mini-recorder. Just a guy by himself who wanted to know firsthand what was actually going on. I tracked him down and asked if we could do a recorded interview for this podcast. He told me he knew I'd been in media and was a one-time MPP. He was exceptionally polite, but said he would respectfully decline my request because he was not used to the attention, and posted the blog, which he does on a range of subjects frequently and has for quite a while, but only for a small group of friends to monitor. I respected him for that. Bottom line, however, is that he discovered real, live, blue-collar working people hailing from sea to sea to sea, camped out in Ottawa. There was no rowdiness. They were willing to chat and did so, and he could find no evidence of any alliances to fringe groups. No racists, none of that. They could, you might argue, have hidden any signs of that, but hey, he didn't advise anyone he was coming. He had no visible reporting equipment. He did not and does not work or ever intend to work as a reporter. He's just a local Ottawa guy, gainfully employed, who found people ready to do what it takes to stand up to unfair authority. That's my summary of how he characterized what for him was an enjoyable and informative evening. And oh yes, he says they don't honk after evening, and he's been sleeping quite well. My tendency is to view this from afar and draw the conclusions he drew from up close. Unlike him, I have been a reporter. I don't know how many demonstrations and campouts I've covered, but it's certainly in the hundreds. I can attest that there are always bad apples, but mostly there are fervent believers in any cause, right or wrong, but true believers. I've been pushed around in the process too, including by police, by union members, and in one case by Indigenous protesters. I don't harbor any ill will, but I do retain the lessons I learned about what can happen when excited people who believe in something get together. Yet in Ottawa, while we saw the few crazies at the outset, we now see peaceful people standing up to government edicts with which they disagree. Let me address the issue of what we should do here. I am no more in possession of a magic solution than you are. Opposition parties want to sit down with Prime Minister Trudeau to come to a solution everyone can buy into. That's not a bad start, not a bad suggestion, but it doesn't look like he's interested. The leader of the Liberal Party of Ontario, who is desperate to use any issue to draw attention to his bid for election in June, is busy dumping on Premier Ford for being derelict in not resolving the standoff, which, after all, is in Ontario. The police on scene say forcible removal of these monster vehicles is nigh on impossible, and forfeiture of property is not in any law I know of, even if they could move the trucks. Not having the answer doesn't mean I don't believe there is an answer. I'll say this. Sitting down with the legitimate leaders of this protest, because in the end, that's what it is, that is no different than having discussions with any protesters. That's often been the best approach to reach consensus. Our Prime Minister would be wise to invite all media to follow him under full security into the midst of the trucker encampment for a discussion with leaders, openly. Not the leaders to his office, him to them. If he did that and was shouted down or appeared to be threatened in any way, that would be a loud rebuke to Canadians like me who believe the truckers are real people with the real issue shared by many, if not most of us. On the other hand, if that meeting produced polite dialogue and the promise of some honest effort toward resolution, perhaps we could dispense with long-term encampments and develop a new respect for Justin Trudeau. God knows he has interacted with a lot worse than these legitimate Canadian laborers, the same people who brought us our food and supplies on a daily basis and never stopped, even when COVID was a much clearer and ever-present danger in the pre-vaccine days. Remember, that is indeed who they are. And that brings us to the question of vaccines generally and the mandates. A year ago, when the vaccine program was hardly even underway in Canada, the expectation was that we'd see most people flock to vaccination sites as fast as the miracle liquid could be offered. The expectation was also that we could achieve herd immunity sometime north of 70% vaccination, and definitely if we ever got above 80%. Then we began to see the introduction of vaccine mandates, forced vaccination or termination for people working in sensitive jobs, city workers, provincial workers, long-term care workers, military, lots of mandates. Vaccine passports came out, preventing the unvaccinated from dining with us, going to a movie or sports event with us. The question at the door was literally a bad line from a World War II movie. Are your papers in order? But frankly, when all the mandate stuff began, I couldn't wait to be vaccinated, and I have indeed had my shots and the booster. I publicly agreed with the mandates and with the passports because it seemed to make scientific sense. I have now concluded that my beliefs then were wrong for now, and the time I spent haranguing people back then who disagreed with me was wasted. Why? Because the information we were being given turned out not to hold up as COVID mutated. I'm not saying anyone purposefully lied. I'm just saying we were never going to achieve herd immunity, and we were not going to erase an ever-changing virus. And if that were true, and it is, doesn't it mean we have to re-educate and revisit the questions this information begs? Examples. Can we vaccinate our way out of this? Or do we need to segregate the vaxxed from the unvaxxed? I encounter people on the internet who argue with me that we need everyone to be vaxxed so there are no unvaxxed because we have to prevent spread by the unvaxxed. First, who the hell thought a year ago that vaxxed people could spread anything, much less catch the illness? Let me quote from the Mayo Clinic. This material was published 7 weeks ago, and again, this isn't me talking, this is from the Mayo Clinic, and I quote, "A small percentage of fully vaccinated people will still get COVID-19 if they are exposed to the virus that causes COVID-19. These are called vaccine breakthrough infections. People with vaccine breakthrough infections may spread COVID-19 to others. However, it appears that vaccinated people spread COVID-19 for a shorter period than do unvaccinated people. Vaccination also might make illness less severe. If you are fully vaccinated, the overall risk of hospitalization and death due to COVID-19 is much lower than among unvaccinated people with similar risk factors." Now, do you notice the use of the word small in describing how many breakthrough cases in vaccinated people there might be? We now know it isn't so small. Then they say breakthrough cases in vaxxed people may, again their word, spread COVID-19 to others, but we know it does. I had 3 people myself, all vaxxed, get it in the past month from other vaxxed people in my own family. But rather than parse the words, and now with about 90% of us vaxxed, maybe it's time to stop screaming about vaccinations and begin moving to accept our fate. At some point, there will be newer medicines. We already are seeing some things come to market. In the next year or two, I'll wager, at the first sign of a scratchy throat, you can pop a pill available from the local Shoppers or Rexall and forget about COVID. Things aren't bad now, but that reality is around the corner. Right now, today, failure to address all of this realistically and with haste is literally splitting our nation. I'm Peter Sherman. Find future episodes wherever you find your favorite podcasts or by visiting SHURMANUnlimited.com. So if you like what you heard, tell a friend. If you really liked it, tell 3 friends. If you really hated it, tell 3 enemies. We'll talk again soon.